the stream. Okay, Chairman, I can confirm that we're now live. We can start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, and a very warm welcome to a virtual meeting of the Major Applications Planning Subcommittee for High Speed 2, HS2 of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This is a virtual meeting that is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. My name is Councillor Steve Tuckwell, and I am the Chairman of this evening's meeting. We need to go through some online housekeeping protocols as we are in online format. So before we start, can we just ensure that all mobile phones around you are on silent? If you are wearing a headset, can you ensure that the microphone is sufficiently away from your mouth to avoid any unnecessary noise? Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking and unmute to speak. And only one person may speak at a time, and I as chairman will call those to speak once you've indicated either by waving your hand or using the little button on your computers. Again, as we're in online format, we need to do an attendance roll call just to confirm for those who may be watching on YouTube who is here. So we'll start off with the voting members of this evening's meeting, and we'll start off with Councillor Higgins, the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, the Labour Lead.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Hagger.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Good evening to you. Councillor Morgan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswell.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. Liz, can that confirm all voting members are present this evening?
Yes, that's confirmed, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, we need to do the same process for the officers that are supporting us this evening. So we'll start off with our Specialist Planning Officer, Ian Thine.
Present, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Head of Planning, James Roger.
I'm present, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening. Our Democratic Services Officer and keeping us all in check this evening, Liz Penny.
Present, Chairman.
Good evening. And the Borough Solicitor, Raj Allah.
Good evening, all. I'm present.
Good evening to you. Liz, can you confirm that's all supporting officers attended?
Yes, Chairman, that's confirmed.
Thank you. Okay, in terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time for a lost connection, etc., I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorum, which is 3 councillors. Importantly, any councillor who does leave the meeting for a period of time will not be able to vote on the item that they were not present for. Okay, right, that's the preamble, Chairman's announcements. We can now go into the main body of the agenda this evening, and we'll start with agenda item 1, Liz, which is apologies for absence.
Yes, no apologies today, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. We can then go on to agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest in matters before this evening's meeting. I'm not seeing any indications, so I take it we've got no declarations. That's good. Agenda item 3 is to receive the minutes, receive and agree the minutes of the last meeting, which was a while ago now, 25th of November. So I'm getting any nods, thumbs ups. We're all good. So
Chairman,
Liz,
sorry to interject. There were 2 sets of minutes actually that we need to approve.
one was the 14th of January,
yes,
which was the
correct.
Yeah, so we got 2 sets of minutes, 14th of January and 25th of November. Thank you for pointing that out, Liz. But I'm not seeing anybody indicate any changes they'd like to be recorded. Okay, we can sign those off then, Liz. That leaves us on to agenda item 4, which is to confirm matters notified in advance or urgent.
Sorry, Chairman. Councillor
Chairman.
Higgins is indicating.
I wasn't present at the last meeting, but it says I am. But
sorry, Councillor Higgins, was that that was the 25th of November meeting?
Yeah, it was, no, the 14th of January 21 says virtual committee member, and it puts my name here. I wasn't here.
Ah, right.
Okay.
That was
This is the first meeting I've been to on the HS2. So. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
I think that 14th of January meeting is to confirm the new members. Is that correct, Liz?
Yes, it is, Chairman. That's correct. So it was literally just that. It's just purely to confirm the members.
It's more of a cosmetic technical point, isn't it? But yeah, okay, all right. But we'll record Councillor Higgins' point there anyway.
Yep. absolutely. Thank
Okay,
you.
so agenda item 4, matters notified in advance or urgent, we have none. And agenda item 5 is to confirm that all items this evening are in public, items 6 and 7, and there is no part 2 items in private. Okay, and we will be taking it in the order that is published in the agenda. So that's the preamble completed. We can now move into the main body of the agenda, which is agenda item 6, which is the River Colne realignment, Moor Hill Road, Harefield. And I'd like to pass the baton over to Ian to take us through the presentation. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going to start the presentation now. Bear with me. Hopefully you can see that, Chairman. Thank you very much. Right, so agenda item 6, River Colne realignment, Moor Hill Road, Harefield. So this is a Schedule 17 planning application under the HS2 Act for a realignment of the River Colne, which borders London Borough of Hillingdon and Buckinghamshire Council, as it's now known. It's submitted under Schedule 17, as I said, Part 3 Part 2 for earthworks. So what we're determining tonight is the detailed design of the external appearance of the works and whether or not they ought to and could reasonably be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity, to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the area, or to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest or nature conservation. So for the relevance of tonight, it's A and B of that list. So to preserve the local environment or local amenity and to preserve a site of archaeological or nature conservation value. The scheme is a scheduled work, and therefore the criteria elsewhere in the Act to seek an alternative location for it does not apply. So it's a question of whether or not this alignment needs to be modified. So you can see the blue line plan, as I said before, HS2 ditching the normal planning norms and going for blue lines instead of red lines. So the red line plan there, or blue line plan there, just to the west of the Colne Valley and the lakes, in particular there, Broadwater Lake, which is this large expanse here. And you'll see the red line, which delineates approximate line of the viaduct. So the viaduct will be crossing the River Colne, and that is an aerial view of it at the minute. It's a rather nice natural looking river at the minute, and it will have a viaduct basically crossing it. So the reason why the alignment is necessary is because on this plan you can see the purple areas. These are the viaduct piers, and you can see this particular viaduct pier, Pier 39, is planted pretty much in the bank of the existing alignment, forcing the river to come southwards, or southwestwards, sorry, my apologies, on this map. Realignment is approximately 190 metres long, and it's just to divert around Pier 39 and in between Pier 38. So it's a alignment between Piers 39 and 38, 190 metres long. And you can see just this one element of the sections I've brought forward from the application. You see the blue line is the existing alignment and the red line is the new alignment. So you can see it shifting just to the west of the pier, and that's just to accommodate this rather large structure. And that's essentially what the application is for. It's just for the realignment to get round the piers. Now, I'll go into the principal concerns, Councillor. So the first principal concern the officers have is related to the ecology. The site is in a site of special scientific interest. It's also a nature conservation site designated within the local plan. So in terms of ecology, there will be an impact. The issue is this committee has to consider whether or not this proposal needs to be modified to make its way around that viaduct. So the viaduct is the trigger for the realignment. The viaduct is now approved. So that piers 38 and 39 will not move from now. So they are now set in stone, metaphorically, not literally just yet. The Colne now must be realigned to make its way between piers 38 and 39. It can't go anywhere else. So the question for this committee is whether or not it needs to be modified on the alignment put forward by HS2 between piers 38 and 39 to an alternative alignment between piers 38 and 39, because it has to be amended to make a way for those piers. So that's the question for the committee tonight. And leading on to that is whether or not the impacts are so great with this alignment that it requires an alternative alignment, pretty much the same location. Obviously, a slight tweak to the changes. Now, as part of the consultation on the application, it's gone to both Natural England and the Environment Agency. Natural England have a separate duty under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, section 28 of that, which requires any public body to preserve and enhance ecological value of the area and also protect the SSSI itself. So Natural England will have no objections to this application and will be securing the protection of the SSSI through a slightly different consenting process under section 28 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. The Environment Agency is also a statutory consultee in relation to flood risk and ecology, but sticking with ecology for the time being, they're required to comment on the aquatic environment, which sits within their remit. Now, the reason this application, Chairman, has taken some time to get to committee is because the Environment Agency had not properly engaged on that element. There is a twin track approach to these submissions. So under Schedule 17, they come to the Council for planning permission for the designs, and separately they go to the Environment Agency for Schedule 33 of the Act, which requires them to deal with water related matters, both quantity and quality, so flood risk and the actual water quality of within the River Colne, and also in the groundwater underneath. They have come back, and we've challenged them on their involvement in Schedule 17, and they've come back and they've indicated they have no concerns subject to amendments that were made through the Schedule 33 process. So the Environment Agency on record are saying there are no objections, no concerns related to the ecological environment and no issues with flood risk. So with regards to that, officers do not believe that there's any requirement to seek a modification to this route. So if I just summarise that. So there'll be an adverse impact to ecology from the works of the environment. Of course there will. You're moving a river. But the issue is it's protected by involvement from Natural England and the Environment Agency. And you'll recall, Chairman, of the case that London Borough of Hillingdon won as part of the Court of Appeal into an earlier Newt Pond application. The Court of Appeal stated that they were concerned about HS2 being judge and jury of their own work. Well, in this instance, the work is overseen by Natural England and the Environment Agency through separate consenting processes. So this isn't a question of the council leaving it up to HS2 Limited to just crack on and do whatever they want. There is separate processes in place. Importantly, the council has twin tracked this with Schedule 33 application. So we are fully aware, fully cognizant and fully comforted by the role that the Environment Agency has played, that they are happy with the process and the approach taken with this application. So as I said, the works that trigger the realignment have already been approved. The works are subject to method statements and controls overseen by the Environment Agency and Natural England. So that all reduces the impact of the scheme. So the principle of the proposal is already established and the proposal cannot be relocated, particularly now that the location of the viaduct piers are fixed. There is no reason to believe a modification to the realignment of the river between piers 38 and 39 would result in less impact. So then it all comes down to mitigation. Now, as ever with these HS2 applications, Chairman, the mitigation is not before this committee tonight. The mitigation comes at a later date through landscaping plans and in particular a Schedule 17 application to bring this particular scheduled work into use. And as part of that, there has to be a degree of comfort that the mitigation caused by the impact of the realignment has been offset. So unlike normal planning rules and normal planning applications, you're seeing the harm tonight, in a sense, but also that there's trust in the system that the mitigation comes later on. So the designs in front of us, we believe, don't need to be modified. The mitigation will come at a later point before this committee, which we will sign off. And officers are working closely with HS2 Limited to try secure a lasting legacy of the project, which will be a benefit in this area. So that would be a benefit to the River Colne. And there's no reason to believe that the River Colne alignment proposed and planted correctly couldn't have an enhanced environment for wildlife in particular. In relation to flood risk, a little bit more straightforward. Again, obviously, as soon as you start messing around with a river, there's a chance of increasing the risk of flooding. However, the Environment Agency is a statutory body with respect to the main rivers and river flooding, and they have confirmed through the Schedule 33 process that the realignment will not increase the risk of flooding to people and property. The council secured extra flood data to inform us of that. That's been submitted as part of the application. So as far as we're concerned, the officers have no cause for concern in relation to that. A separate Schedule 33 process has been tracked, which provides further comfort and evidence that the issues of flood risk has been appropriately considered. So that deals with the main issues of the officers. I'll come on to the recommendation in a second, Councillor. There's 2 consultation responses that are of note. The first is from the Colne Valley Regional Panel, a panel set up to secure additional mitigation to that provided by HS2. As is the normal concerns with these applications, the mitigation presented is not adequate. And it's not adequate because it's not part of this submission. It comes at a later date. So the Colne Valley Regional Panel have indicated concerns with the mitigation as currently proposed. I share their concerns, but their concerns are not relevant to the determination of this submission tonight. It is the intention that those concerns will be offset at a later date through the discussions on the mitigation and ultimately the Schedule 17 bringing into use application. The second series of objections related to the water environment, and particularly associated with the viaduct. Again, that's not before the committee tonight, Chairman. I understand the position from HS2 on the impacts on the water environment. And I know there's a lot of concern about the lack of public-facing information on it, but that's not for this committee to resolve tonight through this and the consideration of the alignment of the River Colne. A second objection received within that consultation response related to an area of flood risk compensation works to the east of the Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre Lake. Again, that is not before this committee tonight. So those objections are not relevant to this submission for the realignment of the River Colne, the 190 metre stretch between piers 38 and 39. So with that in mind, Councillor, Chairman, the recommendation is to approve with the informatives as per normal, seeking a lasting positive legacy in the area, and for the nominated undertaker, i.e. HS2 Limited, to work with the council to improve the restoration of the land once HS2 is operational. And I would say that that needs to be extended to include the Colne Valley Regional Panel, and to make sure everyone has a role to play in securing the lasting legacy of HS2 in this area. Further officer advice, as said out at the bottom, is the restoration of the land will be subject to a Schedule 17 bringing into use application. That means there is a secondary consenting process essentially for the mitigation and the landscaping arrangements, and HS2 will be required to fully explain how the restoration offsets the harm caused by these earthworks and all the others, particularly the viaduct. So, Chairman, if there's nothing further for me to add at this particular moment in time, I will stop presenting and return it to you, sir.
Thank you for taking us through that, Ian, as ever, bringing a very technical subject to life that we can sort of like understand, and obviously we've got to look at that. But before I go over to members, I can see Councillor Higgins and Councillor Oswell have indicated I'm going to invite Raj in to give us the benefit of his legal wisdom so that members can have that information when they start the debate soon after. Raj?
Okay, thank you. Very good evening to you all. I've set out my Borough Solicitor comments on pages 22 and 23 of the report. And what I wanted to do in 2 or 3 minutes really was to just summarise those comments for the benefit of members this evening, and particularly for Councillor Higgins, because this is his first meeting, just to understand some of the legal reasoning and rationale behind these Schedule 17 applications, because they are not straightforward and they have been subject to quite a lot of litigation now between the council and High Speed 2 Limited. I think the first legal test which members need to have regard to this evening is whether they feel that they have sufficient information before them in order to determine this application. So this is essentially the Wednesbury reasonable test, which some of you may be familiar with, and it is a long established public law principle that a decision maker has to have sufficient information in front of them in order to make a reasonable and a lawful decision. The Wednesbury case was decided back in 1948, so that is one case, I'm pleased to say, which is actually older than myself, but there you go. So the Court of Appeal back in July 2020, they laid down some very important legal principles which remain established law today. And it's important for members to realise that High Speed 2 Limited did seek permission to appeal this decision to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court didn't give permission because they thought that the application for permission had no legal legs. So the Court of Appeal's decision is definitive law in this particular area. And what the Court of Appeal said is that the decision maker, the local planning authority, have to have sufficient information in front of them in order to make a lawful decision. So they didn't really say anything new. This is already established law, as I've said, but they, if you like, reaffirm the legal position. It is very helpful to have their analysis and their ruling. And as I said in my legal comments, it is the view of officers that High Speed 2 Limited have provided sufficient information in this particular instance. And the information which has been provided in the written report has, of course, been supplemented by Ian's presentation. But officers can, give the advice, but essentially it's up to members themselves to decide whether they have enough information. The second legal test, if you've got past that particular hurdle and you feel that there is sufficient information, I think Ian made it clear that, there are some unsatisfactory aspects, connected to this particular application. But the important test which you have to bear in mind this evening is that you can only refuse this application or impose a condition on an approval to this application if one or more of the statutory grounds in paragraph 3 of Schedule 17 are actually satisfied. And I will just read them out again for Councillor Higgins' benefit, because I'm sure members now will become familiar with these grounds because they do come up every single time that we meet. So we can only refuse the application if the design or external appearance of the works ought to and could reasonably be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity, to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in a local area, or to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest or nature conservation value. The other ground for refusal is if the development does not form part of the schedule work, that the development ought to and could reasonably be carried out elsewhere within the development's permitted limits. And in the body of the report, it is actually made clear that in officers' opinion, none of those statutory grounds have been satisfied in this particular case. And you've also heard fully from Ian as well in his presentation that the viaduct has now been approved and that there is no scope for asking for a reasonable modification of these works. So my legal advice to members this evening are that there are no statutory grounds for refusing the application. And there are also no statutory grounds for imposing a condition if you approve the application. As Ian has said, an informative is recommended, but an informative sits, quite low down in the hierarchy of planning considerations, and it doesn't have the same weight and effect of a condition. It's really there for good practice, if you like. So that's my legal advice to members. I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you for that, Raj. And I think that complements Ian's presentation very, very nicely. And I'm sure members have picked up on the very eloquent points that you've made there. So we can now throw it open to debate. And I can see we had Councillor Higgins indicated first, followed by Councillor Oswald. So, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chairman. Raj, just first of all, obviously, as you know, I'm aware that I am a trustee of HOAC, but this application is nowhere near HOAC, so I don't believe that I have to declare an interest on it. So
No.
I'll take that for granted, and I hope that's right. If I'm wrong, please shout.
No, that's fine.
I just got a couple of questions. I know that it's very hard for us to do anything about this, but in section 33, does that determine which the chicken and egg situation of which is done first? Is it the river is realigned first and then they do the pylons, or does the pylons go first and the river's done after? And if that is the case, then is that there's pollution, obviously contamination of the water could be a problem there. And obviously, and forgive my ignorance, is there also for archaeological grounds that if lots of riverbanks do have a lot of artifacts that are found in riverbanks, Saxon stuff and those sort of things, is that also in section 33? And that's apart from that, obviously I will go with officer's recommendation, but those are just my questions.
Okay, Raj or Ian, I don't know who's best to pick those points up, actually.
I think they are technical points.
I was going to say it's probably more for Ian there. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Raj. So picking up the first point about archaeology, I'll do that one first. Absolutely correct. That's for Schedule 17 for this submission. There is a requirement as to protect archaeological sites of interest. Historic England have been consulted and have raised no objections to this proposal. So we take their lead on that. Historic England through GLAS, Greater London Archaeological Advisory Service. So they've raised no concerns. That was the cause for the original appeal, I'm sure Raj would remember that very well. So there is a requirement for them to provide evidence if GLAS require that. GLAS haven't said so, so we wouldn't raise that as a further objection or further cause for concern. With regards to the water environment, this is the anomaly of Schedule 17, is that there is a requirement as to protect the local environment. So in theory, yes, the impacts on the water environment, I believe, should be contained within the Schedule 17 element of the applications. HS2 Limited don't necessarily share that views, and we've had discussions on that point in the past, and I'm sure Raj is well aware of those as well. And that point is still yet to be fully determined. However, in this instance, the concerns on the water environment come from the viaduct, not the river. So the impacts on the water environment relate to the viaduct and the drilling down of piers, which go about 50, 60 metres deep. So that's part of the viaduct submission that was approved by the planning inspector at the end of last year. In relation to the water environment here, I think the way that it would work is that the river would start to be realigned before the pier works are complete. But that's one for construction management and dealt with through the separate consenting processes. So the way that it should work is that the council signs off the design for a scheme, and then the Environment Agency should indicate how that design gets delivered. So that's how I would say it would, the best way of doing it, so that everyone is aware that they've done the best to design out any impacts, and then the Environment Agency comes in and uses Schedule 33 to minimise any residual impacts. The approach that normally taken is that they're now twin tracked, so that we have all the information in the Schedule 17s to give us comfort that the designs are acceptable, and that's the case here. So as far as we're concerned, the concerns you raised about the viaduct, that was on the previous submission on the viaduct application, not for this submission, although officers do share your concerns that the water environment and impacts on it associated with the viaduct, we're still not yet entirely comfortable that we have all the information on that.
Thank you very much, Ian, through you, Chairman, and I propose, Chairman.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Councillor Higgins. I've got Councillor Oswald there who's indicated.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Higgins has touched on a point there about what comes first. I would hope that they would align or realign the river first, because we're going to have to go with this we were going to, I don't think we'd be able to refuse this because of what it says in the report from Natural England and the Environment Agency. But anyway, Chairman, I hope that the river is realigned before construction work goes ahead. But reading what Natural England have said about development will not have significant adverse impacts. Well, there will be impacts. There always is. We've been here before with Terminal 5 when I think we had to realign 2 rivers, I think it was, certainly one. I think it was the Duke of Northumberland River. And there was an awful lot of detail that went with that about the adverse impacts on, I was going to say pond life, but it's not just pond life. It's just about everything that uses a river. But we got around that, and I'm sure that we'll get around this. And if Councillor Higgins has moved it, then I'm quite happy to second it because I think that's the only way forward with this. I'm not unduly unhappy with this. I actually think it's all right. So I'll either move it or second it, whatever's been done. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, no, thank you, Councillor Oswald. Some really good points that you made there. Okay, any other members want to participate or ask any questions of officers? I'm not seeing any indications. Okay, well, we are moved and we are seconded, so we can go to the vote on this one. So item 6, realignment of River Colne. Councillor Higgins, you moved, so that's Councillor Duncan.
Approval, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Go with officers' recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hagger.
Yes, for, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
For, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswald seconded. So I make that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unanimous 6 for approval. Is that correct, Liz?
That's correct, Chairman.
Okay, I can confirm this evening then that agenda item 6 is approved. Okay, thanks for participating in that debate. We can now move on to agenda item 7, which is the land adjacent to Breakspear Road, South Ickenham. Ian, do you want to take us through this one?
Thank you, Chairman. You can start presenting again. Can you see that, Chairman? Thank you. Right, agenda item 7. Hopefully this will be extremely straightforward, Chairman. This is a Schedule 16 application under the HS2 Act for the restoration of a site that's just been vacated by HS2. So under Schedule 16 Part 5 of the Act, land to be restored, given back to a previous landowner that's been taken temporarily, has to be approved by the council, the final restoration scheme. Under Schedule 16, generally the requirement is that the land is returned to exactly what it looks like before. So I don't mean to downplay this, Chairman. We're asking, HS2 Limited are asking permission to return the land to what it was before. So basically last year. So with that in mind, it should be relatively straightforward. It was grazing land, farmland, and it's going to be returned to exactly as it was. So I'll just go through, hopefully fairly quickly, but obviously any questions at the end, happy to take. This is Greenbelt land off Breakspear Road South, just south of Brackenbury Farm, which is the listed building section up here, actually a scheduled ancient monument. This is the area in question. You can see the HS2 works here, all the dirty looking area. And essentially all it was an area that was used for affinity water main diversion. So it had tarmacking, it had aggregate put down, Harris fencing to border it off, and then just general construction traffic on the site. Plenty of photos like this, but I think this is the most interesting of them all. So under Schedule 16, before giving up possession of land of which possession has just been taken under paragraph 1 of the Act, the nominated under it must, in accordance with the scheme agreed with the owners of the land and the relevant planning authority, put the land into such condition as the scheme may provide. The intention in this instance is to return it to as it was before. So here it is, a few years back, 2012 I think it was, all nice grass fields with a farm just to the south of it. HS2 came along and started doing various bits of work with it. And now they want to put it back to as it was before. So the officer recommendation, Chair, apologies for the quick and speedy presentation, but there really is nothing further of note to this one. Subject to development being carried out in accordance with the plans and seeding specification for the reinstatement to grazing fields. So essentially, they're just going to plant it up as it was. There is a requirement on HS2 to look after this land for a short period of time to make sure that all the grass is established and the topsoil is was adequate, and it's going to work as an agricultural field. So that's as straightforward as it is, Chair. So I shall stop presenting and return to you.
No, thank you very much for that, Ian. It's not often we get straightforward ones on this committee, so nice change. Well, let's hope it's a straightforward. The councillors haven't had their input yet, but I can see Councillor Higgins indicating, followed by Councillor Duncan. So, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chairman. I will propose this. I don't really have a major issue with this. The only thing is obviously I assume that they will remove all the hard standing that they put down, and then they're not just going to put stuff over the top of it. But I would hope that would be right. So that's all I'll say, really. If anybody can tell me that's different, then I'll be quiet. Thank you.
I think Ian was nodding there, so I take that as, yeah, it will be restored to as it was before. Okay. Hard standing removed. I've got Councillor Duncan, followed by Councillor Morgan. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to second, but I wanted to, because it's good that something is now actually going back to how it was originally and some of the green fields are being restored. I just wanted to ask, in view of the vehicles that have used the site, if there's any oil or contamination from vehicles that go into the ground, is that cleared as part of the works, please? I'm assuming it is, but just want to make sure.
Interesting point, Councillor Duncan. Ian, can you pick that up?
Yes, Chair. So the requirement is for all the hard standing that was put down. So the hard standing provided a cover layer to the ground below. All that's to be ripped up and taken off site, and then the topsoil, clean, fresh topsoil, will be brought in. So in theory, there shouldn't be any contaminants left. If there is an issue on the site, then that will be part of the initial takeover or initial handover that the HS2 Limited have with their landowner. So there would obviously be a role for HS2 Limited to work through with monitoring over the course of the next year as they make sure that the site takes and is adequate for what it's being restored to. So I would suggest that the controls are in place to manage that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan, you okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good. Councillor Morgan, you got your hand up there, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've just got one very quick question. We've been talking about the restoration of the land back to as was. Does that include damage to hedgerows, trees, and anything else like that may have been uprooted to make this land feasible for HS2? Other than that, I'm quite happy to second the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morgan. Ian, any points on hedgerows and trees, etc.? So
there is there's a variety of ways that the restored land comes to us, and I mentioned the one on the previous agenda item, which was a bring into use application, which is a proper consent process. This is a temporary possession that was taken by HS2 Limited. So the approval is basically to put it back to what it was before. In terms of the loss of hedgerows and various things like that, HS2 Limited is under a requirement for no net loss to the ecological environment, particularly in this area in the Cold Valley, which is declared a sensitive site as part of the Act. So there is a requirement for no net loss. Officers are working closely with HS2 Limited at the minute to remove and reduce their reliance on fencing to demarcate lands and various bits and pieces like that to ensure that we have more hedgerows and planting, and the officers will secure that where we can. Where land is to be restored on sites like this, they will restore it as was previously arranged. So they would work within the demarcated land of the previous landowner, which would have been in this case probably either fencing or hedgerows, and they would be required to restore that and leave those, or either not touch them in the first instance or restore them as required. So hopefully we will start to see a bit more of a restoration lasting legacy on the site, but in terms of this application, they're required to restore the land to what it was previously.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Councillor Morgan, is that okay for you?
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Right, I'm not seeing any other members indicate, so I think we are now at the point where we can go to the votes. So Councillor Higgins, you moved. Councillor Duncan, you seconded. Councillor Brightman?
Go with officers' recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hagger?
Yes, for Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan?
For Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswald?
Yeah, 4, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I can confirm, Liz, that's unanimous for approval. Agenda item 7. Can you confirm?
Yes, Chairman, that's confirmed.
Okay, agenda item 7 this evening is approved. Okay, that brings us to the end of this evening's meeting. That's 2 items covered off, both approved. Thank you very much. We can now I'd like to thank officers and members whilst anybody's watching on YouTube, and bid you all a good evening. And Liz, can you close the YouTube feed down? Thank you very much and good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
If you
you.
could all
Good night.
remain on mute just for a moment, I'll stop the streaming. Thank you.